Hello,
Hi, Abhijit.
welcome
Thank you
to
for
this
inviting me.
latest edition of Dreamers and Unicorns. So we have a dreamer here and a unicorn combined. So, ladies and gentlemen, delighted to introduce my friend Kiran Manral. Kiran, for those of you who like reading, if you like to read chicklit, you've read Kiran. If you like to read about parenting, you've read Kiran. If you want to read about murder mysteries, you've read Kiran's books. If you want to read columns, you sort of have read her columns. If you want to look for a mentor, then you've sort of connected with her. Kiran, what am I leaving out in this entire process?
So much, Abhijit. Thank you so much for inviting me to this show, and it's such an honor to be here. And most happy to talk about what you've left out of that very generous introduction.
No, so delightful that uh, when people say, "What do you do at a party?" How do you introduce yourself? What do you tell them? What is the easiest way to do this?
So, Abhijit, I just recorded a little video for Godrej Laugh, I think yesterday or day before, about something that happened to me a few years ago when I went for a party. It was one of those, movers and shakers and networkers type. I don't know how I landed there. It is not my kind of party, and I don't go for parties. So a very dapper, elderly gentleman asked me, "So what do you do?" "I write books." "Oh, that's all very nice, but what do you really do?" "So I really write books." He just edged away very
Yeah,
carefully
well,
from me.
हाँ, करते क्या हो? What is it that you do?
शौकिया
God.
बुक्स किताब लिखते हैं. That's the thing. It's difficult to introduce yourself as a writer. People don't really take it seriously unless they've heard of you, and one is not heard of yet, I would say. So what do I do?
Oh,
I write books.
you're just being supremely modest about the whole thing, and you know, um, when you look at this whole concept of writing, is this something that you intended to take up as a career? Is this something that you stumbled into, or was it a conscious direction in which you moved? How was it for you?
I blame it all on my grade 10 school teacher called, she was Miss Shirley, and I forget her surname as we all do. She just continues to be Miss Shirley in my head. I wrote an essay which was, in retrospect, I think quite terrible, but she read it out to class, and there, that was it. I was destined to be a writer because she read out that dreadful essay to class. And while
Fantastic.
I didn't know it was going to be a writer, but I went into advertising, journalism, research, multiple things, blogging, and then finally I wrote my first book when I hit 40. What about you, Abhijit? How did you get into writing? You've been in the corporate world for so long, so it was a complete shift, although you do write nonfiction and corporate based stuff. But writing as a passion, how did that come to you?
For me, I started writing as a kid because I used to write letters to my grandparents, and I would write a number of funny letters. You know, wherever I would travel, I would sort of write about that. People that I met, I would write about that. Draw little cartoons and all on the sidelines, and that was how the entire thing started for me. Writing a piece of fiction was on a lark. I didn't really have it. Somebody, when I was leaving Mumbai, somebody presented me a notebook, which was a blank notebook. And one day I kind of just thought that, okay, let me just start writing a story which was in my head, which was, a little bit of my experiences of being in a B school. I wrote about that. So first two books were fiction. Then I wrote three non-fiction books. So that was
So,
it.
somehow I seem to think of you as a non-fiction writer. So I didn't know about the fiction books. Thank you. I must check them out and go get
Yeah,
them.
so those are the MBA books. One of them is called Mediocre but Arrogant. The sequel is called Married but Available. Both
Okay.
MBAs.
MBAs, both MBAs books. There's an entire genre of MBA writing. What do you think? The MBA fiction that we have.
Oh, so that's a for very fertile kind of a canvas in which you can write many different things. So yes, what do you enjoy writing the most? When you beyond reading out that essay, did you really formally learn how to write, or is it something you perfected over time? And how was it?
So honestly, there is a lot to be said about the merits of formally learning how to write, but I don't know. I never really formally learned how to write. I was always a very passionate reader, Abhijit. So I read and read and read till I ruined my eyes and I had to have LASIK twice in my life. So I read so much, and I think that was my training ground for writing. And very honestly, uh, you can be taught all that they can teach you about writing, but if the words don't flow from within, you can't write. So to have those words flow from inside, you need to have that much of reading. That's what I feel. That's my take on it. I'm sure people might feel differently. What about you? How do you get the? Did you sort of learn the process, or did it come to you naturally?
No, no, I'm completely uneducated about this whole thing. I've just, slaved away, and I've learned a lot through reader feedback. I think because I started blogging, and for me, that's really been the way I've learned to sharpen the craft. Though I kind of
Okay.
see that there's a long way to go, but I think that's really what worked with me. Um, and when do you think that it's something that can be taught, because there are lots of courses on creative writing, and you've also worked in advertising for a bit, is that right?
I ran an advertising agency with my husband for quite a few years before we shut it down. So, and I did start off in advertising as a copywriter at a very small agency. So that experience has been there. And I also did my mass comm. I mean, not the full course, but just like a certificate, whatever from XIC. So advertising was there. Advertising teaches you how to get to the point and make it brief and have make it catchy. But writing books and writing fiction is a completely different skill set. I did learn on the job when I was a journalist, but that was writing with crisp reports and features. So different skill sets, Abhijit. You learn to shift between them. And at the end of the day, yes, you can be taught the craft. There are plenty of masters in fine arts in writing and creative writing, and people are doing some wonderful work after graduating from them. And I'm very envious of them that they have done those courses, and I wish I could. But too old to go back to school, I keep telling myself. But at the end of it, it boils down to your facility with words. You
Mm.
can be taught anything, and your ability to think, I think, from another person's perspective, and to have that curious, wild imagination in you that allows you to put yourself in anybody else's circumstances. Or if that doesn't exist, you can be taught anything. And from the best teachers and professors in the world, you won't be able to write something that will touch another person. So it may have style, it may not have that emotionality or that pull or that tug. That's my take on it. So, but to each is their own, whatever works for each individual, I guess.
But you've also, worked for a newspaper where the kind of writing that you do is closer to more factual reporting, or it could be even, closer to nonfiction, if you will. And then you've also done a whole range of many different things. Just walk me through you've done about what, 12 books, right? I always feel
But
extremely jealous of you. And let me tell you this, I'm not in a good way. I feel extremely jealous of people who manage to write so much. And, uh, it just makes me feel completely inferior when I think about that.
don't,
So,
don't, don't even
see,
think about it.
even पूजा
नहीं.
हो रही है, आपकी आरती उतारी जा रही है क्या घर पे? So, yeah.
हेलो घर में आरती नहीं उतारी जाती घर में घर की मुर्गी दाल बराबर होती है so
Okay.
so no that's my mom and dog doing her evening prayers. It's sunset
Sure,
time,
sure.
yeah. So don't be jealous about the 12 books. They're 12 published books, and it just looks very nice. But then when you tell yourself, P.G. Woodhouse wrote some 98 books and he died at 94, still writing his book, and you feel like, oh my God, I have a long way to go. And then there's this wonderful Anjali Baji who's on her like 28th book in 9 years, and then I just feel like
Mm.
crawling under the table. So there will always be, parameters and parameters, and number of books is no judge of output, Abhijit. As long as your books are liked and loved, I think that's enough, even if they're one book or 10 books. So, but my journey actually is very strange. I started makes me sound very ditzy. I started in advertising as a copywriter. I went into journalism. I worked at Asian Age. We just had a very okay. We had just were in the news. Our entire batch of Asian Age first batch girls, and more power to Priya. Then Asian Age. I went to the Times of India as a features writer. I was at Cosmopolitan as a features editor. I was at Trikaya Gray for a very short while in PR, and I realized that PR is not something that is my cup of tea. Quit, had my baby, as most of us do, and got back into entrepreneurship, started a content supply firm back in the first dot-com boom, supplied to Tata Nova, Satyam, a whole bunch of the new websites that had come out there. We were supplying all the content that ran on their sites. The dot-com boom went bust. Then we closed down shop, set up an advertising agency, closing. Oh my God, it's terrible. I've done too many things. Abhijit. Then got
No,
into
it's brilliant.
research. Uh, it's just been like jumping feet first and then hitting the ground running. So got into research, worked with Gartner, ICUNR. It was just ICUNR back then. It's a US-based trend spotting agency, research agency. I was the India cultural lead for I think 5 or 6 years. Then consulted with Vector Insights LLP as a senior research consultant. Was consultant ideas editor at She the People, and I have since the pandemic been doing nothing but writing. That's the joy of the pandemic, I think. So that's been my career graph.
Gosh, it's just
And
amazing. Talk to me about, the work that you did in trend spotting. How do you do trend spotting? What is your method? What did you do?
uh, but there was no method, and that was the madness. So for me, I went in, as I said, blind. I'm not trained to be a researcher, so I worked very intuitively. So my job was basically to look around and see what is possibly going to come up as a trend in consumer behavior. What are the consumers veering towards, whether in food consumption, in fashion, in lifestyle choices, and how this would translate for brands in terms of developing new products and new product ideas, how they could capitalize. You know the draft, you know the stuff. So it was basically that, and of course you have sometimes commission researchers. That was not so much fun, but the stuff that you really put your nose to the ground and you went through all the newspapers and you took ST buses around and listened to stuff and gossip and went into the little tea shops. That was great fun. So it was ear to the ground, seeing what's happening and picking up things that just
What
bloomed.
was the one? Talk to me about something that went from, let's say, eavesdropping gossip on gossip to a trend that you sort of identified. Talk to me about one of those pieces, how it evolved. You know.
So online spirituality. Back
Hmm.
then, this was I think around over a decade ago. I saw we sort of saw the trend in terms of people not wanting to physically go to places but do online darshan and things like that to do there. And now it's common. You're doing your bookings online and you're scheduling your Bhagwan ke aartis and stuff online, and it's just coming out. It was something that we never thought would be possible back then, but it's happening now. As also in terms of fitness, the entire boom towards fitness wasn't so evident back then, but now it's like everywhere. I mean, it's from the youngest to the oldest. Fitness is no longer a choice; it's like a lifestyle for many people today. So we saw it becoming big back then in terms of diet drinks, in terms of low cal consumption of regular foods, sweeteners, things like that. This was way back 10, 12 years ago. So
So
it's
does
all started
something
coming
happen
now.
in society that makes people want to focus on looking good? Is it a sign of confidence, or is it a sign that there's not? I mean, you're feeling not so good about a number of things, and therefore want to look good. Which way does it flow? What is your
I
experience?
think, very honestly, we are a very hyper aesthetic society right now. Also, we are very youth worshipping. So this
Hmm.
entire fear of looking older and therefore being considered obsolete, specifically in the corporate workspace, where there's this paradox where you can look too young and not be considered serious enough to take orders from, or you can look too old and be considered out of it and therefore not relevant and not with it anymore. And people are afraid of crossing the divide on either side. So
And if you stay in
people
the middle,
don't.
you have a midlife crisis. So even that is not
Yeah,
good.
yeah, all midlife crisis. Happily, if you notice, it has escalated in the past few years, even in recruitment policies, Abhijit, you know how it works. I mean, anything over 45 is like not considered a good choice to recruit. Even at senior levels, they're looking for younger with some 40 years of experience. I don't know how that works, but it seems to be that way these days. So I guess that is what is driving people to try and look fitter, younger, healthier, and also our lifestyles had become rather unhealthy, and this is an entire backlash against it. So I don't
Hmm.
know what you observe in all the corporate workshops that you do and stuff like that. How is it playing out there? All the
One of the things we were sort of looking at, there's this clubhouse room, which is where I was listening to some people discussing trends and all that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is so somebody mentioned that there's this whole trend of booking concerts, which knowing fully well that they are not going to go to, or booking holidays, which they are not going to go to. So that I thought was an interesting trend. But if you think a little harder, it's not that hard to figure out why, because in some sense, every time you hear people using the word the new normal, it is actually a way for people to sort of reassure themselves that, okay, all the change and
things.
turn has happened. Now things have settled out. This is the new normal. It used to be A, now it is B. Okay, we were unhappy about A moving to something unknown. Now we know it is B. This is how it is. So this is the new normal. It is actually, in some sense, when there is a lot of churn, you want to figure out a way to sort of anchor yourself. So that is the new normal is this whole thing that I think is the way for people to find that assurance. The second is it's sort of changing the way people are getting back into revenge consumption in some sense that people are saving that money and because they are not going out or they are not sort of doing that. So at one level there is uncertainty which heightens the anxiety. So will I retain my job, or if I have my business, will things be as good tomorrow? So there is anxiety for the future, but at the same time there is this whole thing that, well, heck, I don't know if I live or die, so let me just go ahead and enjoy myself. And so there is this. So I think we are going to be seeing this duality a lot more of. Is my view. What do you think?
Absolutely, I agree with you. This duality is here with us for a long time, and also the compound with the climate change crisis that's happening. So a lot of people are worried that are we going to be surviving long enough to see the earth tipping over? Are kids going to survive? Going to see a different world from which we brought them into? And this entire flux that we're going through right now, through the pandemic, through the climate change crisis, I think, as you said, the new normal is something that we have accepted. It's something that we are trying to settle ourselves into slowly and steadily and trying to figure our way through it. But yet, in some ways, we are grabbing back to the old normal. So that we are listening to, there's a lot of retro stuff still going on with us. We're going back to old songs, to old books. There's a lot of harkening back to what was comfort in terms of maybe food, in terms of listening, reading. There's again a duality in what we're consuming. So let's see what it takes us. Hopefully,
Yeah.
we will accept this new normal and get on with our lives soon enough.
Your last book was a murder mystery. Yeah. Um, so how does one sort of when you write? I've never written a murder mystery. I'm just interested in sort of dabbling in that. So I have a plot which has stayed with me for a long time. I've written it, rewritten it, and I never found myself comfortable enough to complete it. How do you write a murder mystery? Do you kind of start with the first thing that you kind of say that, okay, this guy killed this one, and that's the mystery, and you work backward? Or do you kind of, work your way through from the way the audience is unveiling the mystery? Which way does it work?
Uh, this book, The Kitty Party Murder and the Reluctant Detective, they're primarily comic mysteries. So they're not procedurals, they're not forensic
I
heavy.
know that's a brand new genre that you've created. I mean, what the hell is that? So tell me about that.
So they're funny books. They're books you read for a laugh. So my premise, the murder is incidental to the entire thing. There's not one murder. There's not two murders. There's three murders. Okay, but she's not a detective by any standard. She's just bumbling her way through it. So she's having fun doing it, and I hope that the reader has fun. So for this kind of book, there's no plotting. There's me writing and rewriting and making a mess of it, and then rewriting again, and trying to figure out what is going to make it funnier. That's about it. But that's not the ideal solution, Abhijit. As you know, this is a horrible way to write. It's very time consuming. It is better if you sit and you plot it out and you have your chapter wise synopsis ready so you can do fill in the blanks, especially if you're doing a murder mystery because you can't, have loose end hanging around and you can't have one clue going off in one direction and the murderer appearing from another direction. You have to sprinkle little clues for the reader to be happy and feel like, yeah, I used my brain cells here. But I didn't do any of that. I just wrote it very badly and then rewrote it and rewrote it some million times until I felt okay, I can't rewrite it anymore, and then I gave it to the editor. And I don't recommend that at all. What is your writing process like, Abhijit? Both for your
Mine
fiction and
is,
your non-fiction.
I think writing fiction. I think now I feel that I've sort of evolved on a method for writing non-fiction, which is a lot to do with we're looking at how do you build the ability to structure a logical flow. So think about a non-fiction book like a office presentation, except that it's a different format. And also, in that sense, you have a point of view, and then you sort of want the people to think about things in a certain kind of a way. So that is how I kind of look at that. But when I think about fiction, uh, for me, the entire thing has to be in my head, and I'm just simply doing a blind documentation and dictation from what's in my head. So I brew the entire plot in my head first, and then I work with that. So that's how I have sort of worked on fiction. So it's not the most. See, I think that's what I meant. That if I had gone to, let's say, a creative writing school, I think I would have figured out a way, because there is software which you can use for writing, and it sort of helps you chapterize the entire stuff. And it's just so much more logical. Except for the fact that when I think about it, if somebody gave that to me, would I find it useful? The answer is no,
No.
because it just needs a different kind of a person to um, write in that kind of a logical way. So I have a logic, I have a thought process. So I'm not that kind of a person. I am a little more free flowing. So I have to get the entire plot in my head, then only start writing. And then you'll
That's it.
see my table is full of post-it notes and little these things, and it's very chaotic. And then I'm sort of saying, "Gosh, wasn't that supposed to be later?" Oh, okay, yeah. So it's a very chaotic thing which I have to structure and put it in my piece of
But
paper.
that's the best way, Abhijit. That's the best way because you have your post-it notes and you have all that up there, and that's your conscious mind working on it. But when you're asleep and when you're off your desk, your subconscious is also working on it. If you have everything logical and plotted and all, you will never know where your characters could take themselves. That's my joy of writing unstructured because so many things happen when the characters decide, okay, we are going to do what we want to do. You keep quiet and just write it out. So that's the best way.
Yeah. And which is what I meant, when I said that you kind of, in my mind, when I write fiction, I'd write the entire thing in my head, because that's the only way you can give characters a free rein and say, do what you want. And somebody decides to, go ahead and do something crazy. And then you say that, okay, now how is this going to ever fit in? And, and the characters really don't care. So they say, that's your problem, figure it out. So
curator.
yes, it is a very chaotic way of writing, but yeah, that's perhaps the fun way. Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night and write? Has that ever
No,
happened to you? No.
no.
What's
I
your preferred
dream.
writing time?
My preferred writing time is between bread and butter work.
Oh my God. In between
So,
bread and butter is all the jam and all the good stuff.
so I have multiple windows open. So some research report will be happening somewhere, something else will be happening, and then in between, एक paragraph लिख लिया. That's how it has been throughout.
Hey, how
So
long do you take to do a book from start to finish, from idea to first line to final manuscript? What's your average timeline?
so there are books that have taken shamefully little time, and there are books that have taken years and years. So you know how it is, Abhijit. You've written books. It depends on the type of book. So there are books that have been a couple of months, and there are books that have been like 4 years, 5 years in the making. So from start to finish, I would say if there is no research involved, I can get a first draft out in 6 to 7 months of a
Wow.
serious book. Yeah. And of a fun book, 2 to 3 months. That'll be the first draft. Then after that, I will agonize for years and years before I let it out of my hands. I'll hold on to it. Like, no, no, I still have work to do and it has to do. And that is the tough part. Getting the first draft out is easy, but then the rewrites and the first draft don't look anything the same. So it's
Mm.
difficult to quantify. What about you? How long do you take for your
Oh,
nonfiction?
terrible. It's embarrassingly long. If you sort of really look at the time, it's been on an average about 3 years, from one book to the other has been about approximately 3 years. So shelf to shelf, if I were to sort of look at it, one book on the shelf, another one on the shelf, roughly 3 years. So that's sort of how it has been by and large. I started, so I published my first book, 2005. Actually, maybe a little more than 3 years. I've done 5 books now till 2020. So 15 years, 5 books. So it's about 3 years. Yeah. Okay. That's the math.
That's lovely. So
Yeah. So,
you have
but
good.
no, no, no. It's just, it's, well, I guess it's not about the amount of time, but, because I tend to do a number of drafts. Um, and you're right. I mean, and sometimes the first draft and the fourth draft don't look anything like each other. So it's that. What do you enjoy writing one particular genre more than the others, or is one more challenging than the other, more fulfilling than the other? Which one? How would you describe it? And the reason is there are
So
not too many people who span so many genres. I don't know how you do it, but it's just really very enviable that you do it. You're supremely talented that you are able to do something like this. I'm
no,
really.
no, that's very generous of you. It just means that I'm terribly scattered and I can't focus on one particular genre. My publishers always find it very difficult, because where do we put her? Like romance, chick lit, horror, thriller, and then the poor readers are all confused as to what do we expect next from her. So it makes me difficult to kind of market. It's easy to market somebody who's writing only mythology, somebody who's writing only historical, somebody who's writing only whatever thrillers, whatever, whatever. But I'm like too confusing for the poor reader. How do I do it? I think that's the way I read, so that's the way I write. I read across genres, so I write across genres, and I have a very low boredom threshold. For instance, I know I will never be able to write romance again. It bores me to death. So
Hmm. Why
I,
is it? Do you watch a lot of romantic movies?
I don't watch a lot of romantic movies. I have seen confession time. I've suddenly fallen into the K drama rabbit hole, so there are romances there. But at the end of the day, I'm like, there's so much more to life than romance here. Let's move on into other stuff. Maybe that's an age thing, and maybe I've crossed that age where romance used to excite me. But while reading, I love my two extremes of reading are horror and humor. So there's
Hmm.
P.G. Woodhouse who's got to me, there's Stephen King who's got to me. So I think my
Hmm.
writing sort of bridges that. So I write humor, psychological thriller, dark stories in tribute to Stephen King. I write my funny books in tribute to P.G. Woodhouse, and I think that is those are the two that I really enjoy writing. And yeah, the rest is all yeah.
Is it important to be a voracious reader if you want to be a good writer?
I should think so because reading gives you the tools of the craft. Reading gives you the language, the vocabulary, the syntax, the way to plot, the way to create your character arcs, the way to have different narratives. And if you don't have the tools of the trade, what do you do? So don't think of it as reading for indulgence or reading for pleasure. You must read for pleasure. I see people soldiering through books that they hate because they're hyped and they're on book lists and we have to finish it because we need to talk about how we don't. If it doesn't appeal to you, just abandon it. Life is too short. Why you
Yeah.
want to struggle through stuff? So read for pleasure. I always say read for pleasure. But if you want to be a writer, if you're planning to be a writer, then you have to read for to know language. Otherwise, you have people who are writers who proudly say, "I don't read because I don't want to be influenced." बैठ जाओ यार.
Yeah, yeah.
What do
I
you
know.
feel? Do you
No,
feel
no.
that
I
you
mean,
need to read?
it's really like saying that I can't make a film if I don't enjoy watching films, because I don't want to be influenced. I mean, that's a little crazy for me because you have to be able to look across different styles to be able to evolve your own thought process. Because until you know what lies on the shelf, it's very hard to find a gap which you can write for. And sometimes you don't even think about it as writing to fill a gap or void. I mean, it's just when you have a certain amount of stuff, which you experience and it's triggered your imagination, then you kind of write about it. Which is why I think a number of times when you look at the first book, a lot of your own autobiographical scenarios, it doesn't have to be an autobiography, but a lot of what you've gone through actually gets reflected. Was your first book also like that?
Well, they say my protagonist Kanan Mehra is exactly like me. So I would like to think I'm thinner. So yeah, I think you have to get the first book and the autobiographical elements out of the way in order to keep writing. So that will come out. It's just a purging of yourself,
Hmm.
and that happens. It's inevitable. If you don't get it out, then how do you erase yourself in order to create other characters? Because first the self has to go. So if you, but having said that, I do know people who have written wonderful first books with no autobiographical elements, and I think whatever works best for each individual.
Yeah, yeah. But I think, the way I look at it is that the autobiographical element is the sort of, you have to uncork the bottle. And you kind of throw the first cork out. And then when you pour the liquid, you find lots more variety. I think it sort of really works like that.
Yeah.
But especially for fiction, I think that's what it is. When it comes to nonfiction, also, I think, well, nonfiction, maybe, you write best what you've studied yourself or you worked in yourself and you have a point of view. So I think nonfiction, potentially, it stays with you. You don't really get out of that frame. But yeah, that's how it would be. And
For you, for nonfiction, when you write your nonfiction, how do you arrive at a theme? How do you decide this is what I want to write about? Because your experience is also so diverse. So how do you choose that this is my theme and this is your topic? Does it sort of brew in you for a while and then sort of condense into this theme? Because I'm very curious about nonfiction. I find writing nonfiction difficult, even with the journalistic background. So
So, I do a number of columns and, newsletters and all that stuff on LinkedIn, etc. So, I think a number of things that when I'm writing about, some of them actually I sort of talk about it, what's going on. So, the articles and newsletters, etc., are typically what is happening right now. And then when you sort of see 15, 20, or 50 of them over a span of time, it creates a pattern that, for example, I found digital, when I wrote Digital Tsunami, it was really around the fact that I saw so much happening in that space. And my assumption, and you kind of observe that, then you make a prediction. So my prediction was that it is something because 2016, 5 years back, and I kind of thought that this is going to completely change business models. I mean, besides of course talking about jobs and all that stuff, I never really thought it's going to put people out of jobs, but I definitely thought that it's going to put people out of the skills that the skill that I have is going to get replaced with something higher order, and therefore it's really like saying that imagine a job where they say you could complete if you've completed your ninth grade, you can apply for a job. Next year, somebody says, "Oh, you got to complete your 12th grade," and then 2 years later, somebody says, "Unless you have a PhD, you can't do that." That's the kind of a shift. So I was really fascinated by that aspect. Dreamers and unicorns are not many more things, but yeah, that's what it is. Those articles and posts and all really eventually germinate into something. One or two of those creates a pattern, then you kind of sort of build on that. So I think it's that. What about you? How do you sort of go from post-it to manuscript?
So it's very strange. I think the City Brief section of my newspaper is my most inspiring spot. So I will have my first book, in fact, came from a little news snippet in the daily newspaper about a dead body being found in the back road of where I lived at that point. So that's how one story came. And another story, that's the face of the window, came from a place. I'd gone to Mukteshwar in
Hmm.
Uttarakhand for a holiday, and that was my first trip to Pahad, so to speak. And there I was sitting down in the room, and I saw this cottage bang on the edge of of the mountain, and nothing around it for miles and miles. And I thought to myself, Ki, how do people stay here and how do they live alone, and what if something happens? And that's how the face at the window came about. And Mrs. McNally, the retired Anglican school teacher, came about through conversations with my mother, who taught at Convent of Jesus and Mary at Missouri for a long time, and she, I think, probably had somebody like that there. So, so that give me 1 second. Sorry. So that is how one these stories come. It's just life. It's just people around you, and it's just listening to stories. Missing Presumed Dead was a story of something that stayed with me. Kids I played with, their mother just walked out of home one day, and I was, I think,
Hmm.
3 or 4 at that point. It stayed with me all these years, and came out as a book because it really disturbed me at that time. Like, how would a mother just walk away and leave her kids? So after 40 odd, no, yeah, 45 odd years, it came out in a book.
Hmm.
Sorry.
But I also think that sometimes when you look around, I've always felt that
Sorry.
real life. You want to grab a glass of water?
Yeah, I'll just do that. Just
Yeah. So I'm go grab a glass of water if you like. So when I think about this whole process of finding triggers in the world around you, I think there is a lot to be said that when you think about the world around you, there's always so much happening, and I believe that life actually is far more complex and interesting than, let's say, what people can actually ever read in a work of fiction. Chances are that if you replicated a real life incident in a work of fiction, most people would find it very hard to believe that such a thing could have happened. And I've sort of met so many people in such fascinating kind of stories. I always think if I had written that, people would have said, "This is impossible. It would have never happened like this." And I say, wait, in order to write it in a book, I actually have to dial it down. Do you feel that too?
absolutely, they say truth is stranger than
Stranger
fiction,
than
right? So,
fiction.
yeah. So you in fiction you have to make it plausible. That's one compulsion of fiction. Unless you're writing even science fiction, something like science fiction, it has to be based on actual theoretical science, right? You can talk about galaxies far, far away and going at warp speed and all, but it has to be theoretically possible for people to believe that it could happen. Even a story like Wandering Earth, where they are thrusting the Earth out of the solar system because of a possible the sun exploding on us, that had to be theoretically possible. unless and to make it plausible in science fiction. But in reality, tomorrow something could happen. The sun could just explode, and we who would have thought we would have been in a pandemic that would shut down the world, right?
I know. Yeah.
I was just rereading Isaac Asimov's Spaceship Odyssey 2001, and in that there was a little slight paragraph about the China virus manufacturing a synthetic virus, sending it out in the world, and this was written in 1968. We're
Yeah.
living in 2021, so back then it was plausible. What is happening to us today? So
Yeah, when I saw this movie Contagion, I was actually, completely blown away by the fact that, 11 years back, somebody has talked about, a virus which is going to spread by touch. And it's uncanny how accurately it reflects the way this pandemic happened. And that's really the weird thing. So this time I kind of found that, typically at the beginning of the year, a number of times people talk about, trends. What are the predictions for the year? I kind of always find it very funny because here we find it difficult to predict the weather for tomorrow, and then we're making grandiose statements. But that apart, um, this time I found that there were some agencies, and I wrote about it, that I think it was the Frog Design Agency, which used creative writing as a way to predict the future trend, for the year, which I thought is often a lot sharper because many a times people who write fiction are able to live in a fairly unconstrained world, and so therefore they can predict. So, what would be your prediction for this year?
what would be the prediction for this year? My what would be our prediction for this year? It all depends on how the virus behaves. I think we are not going to that would get into the trend of the realm of trend spotting, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
And
it,
we are not going back to the way we were, Abhijit. We are not going to go back. I think everybody has said that. We're going to go more internal. We're going to go more work from home is going to be all that stuff is going to be the norm, and we're going to be closer and tighter circles. But I do see a rise in consumption, for all that we've been deprived. As you were saying, we're booking holidays which we're never going to take. We're booking concerts which we're never going to go to. So there's going to be a sort of grabbing back of what we feel we've lost in the past year. And will masks become the new normal? I hope not. All my lipsticks
yeah,
are going to be very sad if they do. But and
yeah.
are we going
You
to
have
be
no use for lipsticks anymore, but maybe eyeliners will take off, and then
eyeliners and eye makeup is going to become really, really hot. And I do the fact that I thought, red lipstick could get me through everything. And now I have to learn eye makeup in my old age. So, yeah, we're going to change the way we're living. And
I don't know.
there's
Kiran, I would place my bet on the fact that I think once vaccines, so the deciding factor is going to be once a certain critical mass of people have got the
no
vaccines.
vaccine
In terms of revenge sort of behavior,
consumption.
if you will, people will go right back to
Or
just to experience the freedom of being back in the office. Um, so yeah, I would buy the fact that maybe you'll work from home on a couple of days a week, but I think people value the opportunity to hang around with some colleagues, etc. Yeah, in everything and human behavior, there is one extreme or the other. But I would think that most people, so I'm sort of going out on a limb and making that prediction, that I think we'll go back with vengeance because there's just a certain amount of freedom to say that I can go to a concert without worrying that it's going to kill me. Touch is such an important element of building trust. If that sort of goes away, I think it takes away a certain element of humanity. So I think it will sort of go right back. So
Yeah,
that's
there is skin hunger. There is this entire research on skin hunger. Now people have been reporting skin hunger as a deprivation to the senses. So definitely, yes, I get you. But I also feel people are going to be more tighter and more insular in terms because we've learned that we don't need to be out there all the time. We've learned, we sort of contained ourselves. Let's see how it goes. Small correction, I said Isaac Asimov with Arthur C. Clarke, and that's been niggling me.
Yeah, the 2001 Space Odyssey is
Arthur
others.
C. Clarke. I'm
That's
so
fine.
sorry.
No, that's fine. I would sort of want to know what is, if you divided your typical day like a pizza, and slice it out by the hour. I mean, what does your typical day look like?
Very, very boring, actually. You get the chores done, you run the household, you get your desk. So if I divided it like a pizza with 8 quarters, I would say around 10 quarters are spent sitting at my desk, and 2 quarters are spent ensuring everybody is fed and nourished, and everything is kept in working condition in the house and things are running. So it's a cave person's job, Abhijit. You know that. You're a writer, you're a person. You're just at the desk the whole day and doing different things. So 10 of 8, I mean, we have 8 quarters, right? So 6 of 8 will be at the desk. 2 will be rushing around the house like a headless chicken. That's it.
Hmm.
Not,
Uh,
not really
um,
exciting
um,
stuff.
no, I think you're right that writing is essentially a very lonely profession. So uh, which is why I sometimes wonder if extroverts find it harder to write books.
I
Do
don't know of extroverts who have
are
written
you an
books, but
extrovert?
oh heavens, no. I'd be very happy if I was left alone and never had to see another human being again till I wanted to see one.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's just me for today and this moment, and tomorrow I might change my mind.
And tomorrow you say,
No,
I just want to go out with vengeance and sort of meet
no,
everyone who wants to.
not everyone.
Okay,
Very
all right.
select. No,
Very
no,
selective.
very selective. But no, I'm not an extrovert, and I think we writers are actually very schizophrenic. We like people because we draw on people for to create our characters. Sorry, and because we do, we need to be out with people, but at the same time, we need to be left alone in order to create. So that's that dichotomy that we constantly need to keep balancing in order to create. So that's something I think we all grapple with. How much do we be out there? How much do we go into ourselves in order to create?
Yeah, because I think, there is a initial phase where you're right, where you talk about getting the more number of people that you meet, the more unconnected things you can connect in your head. And then, of course, you just need to have that terrible phase where you lock yourself and just put pen to paper. So, do you enjoy that process more or the first one more?
That's a very
Which one
good
takes
question.
more effort?
It takes more effort to put myself out there. What about you? Are you a people person or do you prefer to be left alone? How does it work for you?
I enjoy. So I think that's why it is a tough one. I like to write. So what I do is I actually start to write very early in the day. So I wake up very early and I write because then, as soon as the sun is up and in a little bit, life starts. Too many people start to call and meet and this and that. So I think in that situation, my day is spent like that, and so I kind of steal those couple of hours early morning where I really, try and keep that writing going. So that's the way that I kind of, you know,
Okay.
find the opportunity. So it's a combination. It's never one or the other, and I'm sure you would also sort of say that you do need to find some triggers. Do you have a sort of a hero in terms of writing who you wish you could write like? Who would that person be?
I think all the best writers, I wish I could write like, I could wish I could write like Stephen King, I wish I could write like P.G. Wodehouse, I wish I could write like J.R.R. Tolkien, I wish I could write like, it's not politically correct to say this anymore, but J.K. Rowling. Uh, I, there are so many, Murakami, Ishiguro. even Jane Austen, I mean, she was considered the chicklet writer of her time, but look at the way her books have survived the test of time. So, Dave Barry, Irma Bombeck, I mean, all of them, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, I think.
Completely, yeah.
So each one of them has shaped me in some way. I don't think I have one specific hero. I keep finding new heroes every single day. At the end of the day, I think anyone whose writing has moved me, I wish I could write like them because I want my writing to move my reader. So that's about it. Who are your
And
heroes in writing? Avdeep, tell me. This is interesting.
my heroes, a lot of my writing was shaped by Bengali writers who I grew up reading. So I read a fair bit of Bengali writers first. So if I were to sort of really look at my influences, early influences, I read Satyajit Ray and Sunil Ganguly were my two absolute favorites. I think I've read most of their writing a couple of times. So that certainly was one big element. The second phase was when I read a number of Hindi writers, and two writers in particular, Premchand and Shivani, really sort of influenced me a lot. And the third phase, I read a fair bit of English language writers. So that continues. So I kind of don't. Unfortunately, I don't read as much of Hindi writing as I used to. I would love to do that, but I have not been able to keep up with Hindi writing as much. I've occasionally tried, Bengali, sort of, there are magazines which bring out during the pujas a compilation of modern writers. So that for me is a quick way in which I stay connected to, some of the more contemporary writers who are sort of doing that. There are lots of good translations which I have enjoyed reading. Um, so I have not read. So I've read some books which have been written in Bengali, translated in English. I've enjoyed doing that. That's another way to sometimes see. It's really in my mind like tasting cuisine which you are very familiar with, but you want to see what somebody else prepares at like. It's that curiosity. So if somebody has chicken tikka masala in another country, how do they prepare it? Does it taste like what we think of as chicken tikka masala? So I think it's really like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a very interesting point. Reading something in translation. Uh, Unfortunately, most of my reading of Indian writers writing in languages has been in translation. I haven't read anything in the original language, and I'm ashamed to say that. So, completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you were to think of giving some advice to budding writers, what are two or three things you would suggest to them?
Far be it for me to give any advice. Um, but I would just say read every day, read as much as you can, write every day. I think we don't practice writing enough as a skill. We think of it as something that the muse will come and make you write, and once the muse arrives, you write your best. And it doesn't happen that way. You just have to practice it every day as a skill and exercise the muscle. That's the way it is for any other craft, I guess. You don't tell an athlete not to practice every day. So why should you, as a writer, expect to get the craft and the skill if you don't write every day? And I'm sure you do it too. Your LinkedIn writing is your riyaz, I would say, or your
Yeah, yeah,
posts are your
completely.
riyaz. And for me, my blogging was my riyaz back in 2003, 2005. So that was a riyaz you put in, and then the books come about.
Absolutely.
What are your tips, Ajit? Tell me. I
Oh
need
my
more
God.
tips because I'm in a writing rut.
No, no, no. I just think that I I don't have any writing tips. It's just I think wouldn't be very different from what you just said. I think writing um, is a very I think it's a tough craft. Uh, I think, as somebody said, you chop wood every day, and then one of the days the muse visits you. So I think it's a lot to do with that. But on a different note, I think when you sort of write for different media. So I do. Whenever somebody says, "Would you want to write for us?" and I always say yes, because when you write for a different audience each time, I think it builds your capability to speak a different language and sort of say the same thing sometime in 200 words, sometime in 1,000 words, sometimes 5,000 words. So I write for academic journals, I write for popular kind of things, and um, so I think the more variety of audiences you keep in mind when you write, the easier. So even Twitter actually is a great. So I spend certain amount of time on most days. I kind of do that. My nemesis is, I am just like a master of typos. So
That
it's
doesn't
just
matter, Twitter. That adds to the charm.
no,
Completely.
it's just like hugely annoying, but that's just something that I have to work to get out of. But yeah, it's the. Um, Thank you. Kiran, this is really just such a fun conversation to have with you to talk about, how you view the world and, your way of writing. And you've written across so many genres and all that. I just find it really admirable that somebody can, have so much of skill to be able to span genres. And I'm very grateful that you came and shared your ideas with the readers and viewers. So thank you so very much for being here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you so much. It's been an honor to be on your platform, and all the very best for all your writing in the future. Look forward to reading your LinkedIn posts every day. So, more power to you, Abdi. Thanks
Thank you
so
so
much.
much. And see you soon. And may all your books be bestsellers. Always.
आपके मुंह में की शक्कर. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye bye.